alle sammen. Today we are speaking about another holiday with pagan origin. We're speaking about Boschuk today. It's not really known in the rest of the world, but it has been celebrated in Scandinavia for quite a long time. But I just made a video about a holiday like 3 weeks ago. Yeah, man, Scandinavians love their holidays. That's what we do. It's in our DNA. We've had a lot of holidays for thousands of years. That's why we're so lazy and we want so much vacation from work. And it's amazing. I'm not saying it like it's a bad thing. It's the best place in the world where people are actually treated like human beings by their employees. So yeah, it's because holidays are in our DNA, man. We like some days off. We like some nice vacation time. So anyway, this day, Barsok, is dedicated to the Apostle Bartholomeus. He was a saint that converted the king of Armenia, which the king's followers were not happy about in ancient times, so they caught him and whipped him and chopped off his head with an axe. And this day in Scandinavian folk magic tradition is also the day that Doomsday was supposed to fall on. So definitely a Christian holiday when you first look at it, like many holidays in the north. It's a Christian holiday dedicated to saints and bishops and other things like that. However, also as usual, it's a holiday that was originally pagan, and when the Christians came in and converted Scandinavia, they couldn't stop the Scandinavians from celebrating these things, so they just decided to call it something else and change the history book instead. And Boschuk is another example. So we're going to speak a little bit about it here. We don't know a whole lot about it, how it was celebrated in pagan times, but I'll go over a few things. So most of these holidays, we don't have ancient evidence from pagan times, but we have some very old books in remote parts of Scandinavia that keep records of how these holidays were celebrated. And most of them were celebrated until pretty recently and are still celebrated in some remote farming communities in Scandinavia. So if you want to read about this, you can read Våre Traditioner by Vegard Solheim. This is the most amazing book that speaks about Scandinavian traditions and holidays. I don't know if there's an English version, but if you speak Norwegian or any of the Scandinavian languages, you'll be able to understand that. So he calls this day Bufarhelg or Bufarhelg. So it comes from the Norwegian word boskap, which means livestock, and bufør, which means just the transportation of livestock. So it is exactly how it sounds. This day or this weekend is when the farmers would move their livestock. In old times, it was normal for the animals to be brought up to the mountains to graze in the summertime and then brought back down to the coasts where most people lived towards the winter. That was normal. We have records of this and archaeological evidence going back 10,000 years, almost to the Ice Age. We know that people lived kind of half and half by the ocean and mountains in Scandinavia. So it's possible that this holiday could have been celebrated in some form at least for more than 10,000 years actually. So it could be very, very old. So we don't know a lot about this holiday, like I said, except that it usually had to do with the slaughter of goats. They would be making the cheese, milk, and cream, and other things to get ready for the winter. And we have records that it was now that the goats were slaughtered right around this time. So in a couple of remote villages in Norway, they even call it baro bukkekniv, which means goat knife, basically. And it's also marked on the primstav with a knife, which is the old kind of calendar that you all probably know of from Scandinavia. So it was also a day that they took a good look at the weather to make predictions about when the winter would come. The whole point of it was they needed to have their livestock down from the mountains before the first frost came. They called it the Boschuk frost, and it was the most dangerous frost of the year because it comes so suddenly, and the frost would be a big problem for the livestock and could make people starve in the winter. So even in some places and all the way in the north of Norway, it was actually a law there that people had to be down from the mountains with their livestock before this day because it was regarded as so dangerous. And it was also dangerous because it was said that the Haug folk would be wandering going around that way, which were spirits or trolls or something from the realm of the dead that was supposed to live underground in the grave mound. So, of course, a grave mound, a very, very pagan thing. So that could suggest that it was practiced somehow in pagan times, like that. We don't know a lot about this day. That I told you pretty much everything that we know about it. We know that there was also some festivals and some partying going around, and there were people walking down from the mountains with all their things. But we can learn a couple more things just from looking at what we do know. So first, there was a slaughter of goats and lots of people coming down from the towns, from the mountains into their winter home on the coasts. So it would have been a full-on party, everybody kind of being back to their home spot by the coast where they would spend the winter and really most of the year. And they would have had a feast with goats. And they would have kept some of the goats and tried to preserve it for the winter, slaughter it and smoke it and things like that, and make as much milk and cheese as you could. And they would, of course, leave some goats alive, but they would have to slaughter most of the animals because they don't have the hay and they don't have the food to feed all of them throughout the winter. So they would have had to slaughter the goats all around this time. But remember, they didn't have refrigerators, so anytime they had to slaughter animals, they tried to preserve as much as they could, but they would have used a big chunk of what they slaughtered right away, and that's when it would have been a feast for the village. So right at this time, there would have been probably a big party, and they would have eaten lots of meat. Lots of stuff from goat, made special recipes, things like that, because they just couldn't preserve it, all of it, themselves throughout the whole winter. Second thing we learn is that it could be practiced at different times of the year. We see it as recorded as the day or the weekend that was closest to the 24th of August. That's when it's marked on the calendar today, but the day would have been different at different areas of Scandinavia, of course. The frost would have come later on in the south of Scandinavia and earlier on in the north or other cold places. So they would have based it upon right before they thought the frost was going to get here. This was the main point of it. And also the time period would have been different. So today, and in the Viking Age, actually, by the way, they were going through a warm period, just like we are today, a warm period in the world. So the first frost probably came quite a bit later on in the year. Maybe it would have been, September, October in some places. But the past 600-700 years, however, it was actually a cold period, maybe from about the 1200s to the 1900s. It was quite a cold period then for humans, so it probably would have been celebrated pretty early now, around the 24th of August, because that is pretty early for the frost to come today. But if we go back a few hundred years, the frost would have come around that time in most places in Scandinavia. So that's about all we know for this one. If you want to try and practice Barsok yourself or Bufarhelg, it would be a good time for a feast, a good time for a walk in the mountains, a good time for a blot if you would like to do that, if you want to celebrate things like the ancient Scandinavians there. So that's about all we know for this one. Stay tuned. The next holiday will be coming in about a month, and I'll do a video on that as well. Vi ses nästa gång.